Welcome to the second part of our discussion on Marxism. You will recall that we dealt with some of the important points of Marxism as a cultural theory in our last lecture, which was lecture 8 in the series of lectures on cultural studies. As you know, these lectures have been are being recorded under the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, and these courses are basically for the students of engineering and technology, and we are trying to bring to them some areas from the humanities and social sciences. But we also hope that some of these lectures that we are delivering under this program would also be helpful for students who are from the humanities and social sciences, at least to help them recapitulate some of the elementary and basic knowledge that we would do well to remember even as we move on to higher studies. So welcome then once again to this lecture on Marxism, and before that, let's do a quick recap. This is on what we did last time in the last lecture. We looked at this school of thought in the history of ideas known as historical materialism, and we said that Marxism as a cultural theory studies the structure and change, of societies. The questions that we can ask here are, for instance, how are societies organized and structured, and how do societies develop and change? So we look at both, the structure of society, of culture, as well as how these change, the reasons why these change at all. We looked at the school of thought that was, the reigning school of thought during Marx's time, and we said that it was idealism, and the best representative during those times was the philosopher Hegel. Idealism argued that our actions are the result of abstract ideas, and ideas were seen as being independent of the material world, and the world itself was seen as a reflection of ideas, or the absolute spirit, as Hegel would have it. Next, we looked at the law of dialectics, as the law behind the movement, the change in history, and we saw that dialectics is defined as a development that repeats historical stages, but repeats them in a higher level, and resulting in a development that is not smooth, but a development by leaps, catastrophes, and revolutions. We also saw the three words, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? These are the three levels, so to speak, of movement, till we reach a synthesis. And I also said that synthesis is one synthesis is the thesis for the next movement. Well, in contrast to Hegelian idealism, we found that nature or matter and not ideas, nature and matter or matter is held primarily, and instead of dialectical idealism, we found that Marx and Engels talked about dialectical materialism. So the dialectical part remains, but where it comes from, whence it happens, that has changed from ideas to matter. So Hegelian dialectics plus materialism gives rise to dialectical materialism. Next we saw what I said was it forms the basis of Marxist theory. And what was it? It goes like this, that socio-cultural change, you remember, socio-cultural change occurs when the forces of production come in conflict with the relations of production. Okay, social forces of production, for example, technology and the relations of production, are the social organization that happens in a particular way or mode of production. We also looked at two very important quotations from Marx, which involve the fact that human beings enter into different relations of production, okay, which are independent of their will or desire, and that these relations of production correspond to a definite stage of development of the material forces. Okay, and then we looked at two important concepts which I will talk about more today, the concepts of base and superstructure, right? Well, then we also looked at this quotation from Marx. He says that we make our own history, but we cannot make it the way we like it or the way we wish it to be, in the sense that men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but these circumstances are ones that are transmitted from the past. So we are not free. We can never be, in the Marxist framework, okay, never be free from the past. And it's like, it weighs like a nightmare, in Marx's words, on the brain of the living. Then we also looked at two other, again, very seminal pronouncements in Marxism, okay, and it is this, that the mode of production, recall what are the mode of productions, or let me we will go to that once again. Let me read this. The mode of production determines the general character of the social, political and intellectual processes of life, in the sense that you may think that the ideas that you hold are yours. But in a Marxist cultural framework, we would argue in the following way, okay, that it is the mode of production, the material mode of production and the organization thereof, that determines the political, social and intellectual processes of life. Remember, in this, we are not, in Marx is not saying that it is deterministic. Okay, he would mean it in the sense of, it is determined in the sense of it is guided by, or it sort of corresponds to, but it would be a vulgar Marxism, which Marx never meant, to say that it is completely deterministic. Then it is not the consciousness of men which determines their existence. It is, on the contrary, their social existence which determines their consciousness. Okay, our awareness, not of just objects of things, but our awareness of social processes, our the ideas that we hold, the values that we hold, all these are determined by our social existence. Okay, and it is not the other way around. This, according to me, is one of the most important, one of the most seminal, seminal ideas in Marxism, as far as our mega question is concerned. And what was our mega question? That why do we live the kind of lives that we live? Okay, and the answer would be, from Marxist cultural theory, that our social existence, that determines the kind of life that we live, and that comes from the particular mode of production existing in that time. So we are in a way tied to history, we are tied to our social circumstances. Okay, so this is what you will find in the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Friedrich Engels, okay, in the beginning of the Communist Manifesto. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle, and the most important word here is class. Okay, class is a very seminal concept in Marxist theory. Okay, and Marx divided classes in you could say two binaries, okay, of those who owned the means of production and those who worked, right? For instance, you have the master and the slave in these are the two classes, okay, in a mode of production that was ancient slavery. Okay, so ancient slavery then would determine the social existence and thereon the consciousness, okay, of people. Then during feudalism, please look at the slide here. During feudalism, you had the overlord and the serf. Now, just before that, you had the master and the slave in a situation of ancient slavery. In feudalism, you had the overlord and the serf. In a capitalist system, you have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, okay, or the capitalist and the laborer. And in a situation of imperialism, you have the colonizer and the colonized. So, let's go back to the quotation. The history of all hitherto existing society then may be read as a history of class struggles. Now, these are the classes that are pitted against one another on the basis of who owns the means of production. Okay? Therefore, the relationship between social classes, okay, the relationship between these classes is not equal, it's unequal. Okay, why is it unequal? Because a very few who form the first part of the binary opposition, they own the means of production. Okay, so when they own the means of production, they are by extension also you could say determiners of our social existence and the consciousness that we carry. The relationship is also exploitative. Why is it exploitative? Because the profit that is accrued, okay, in any mode of production which has these binaries of ones who own the means of production and the ones who do not, will always be exploitative. Okay, the profit is collected by the class in the first part of the binary opposition. Okay, and it is founded on a conflict of interest, right? The relationship is one, there will always be a conflict of interest. The interest of the first part of the binary, of that class, the exploiting class, is that they would always want to earn profit. And the interest from the point of view of the other class, okay, on the right hand side of the binary opposition, that is exploited, would be definitely something else, would be in their own interest. We come to another concept, and you can see here on the screen, the concept of alienation. Okay? Marx dwelt on the concept of alienation, not just with reference to to only the exploited. Okay, if we extend it, alienation is a concept. Now, how do you understand alienation? Alienation is to be separate from something. It comes from the word alien, okay, as we know, and to be alienated is to be separated from something. Okay, now let's see how it is articulated. First, man is a creative worker. Okay, we are not just mechanistic beings, we are creative workers. But with the emergence of private property, man is alienated from the following. As we learned just a while ago, what is the motive behind having a system in which only few people earn or rather own the means of production? Obviously, it is private property. Okay, the accumulation of private property and the accumulation of a surplus which is not shared, okay, with the other half of the binary opposition. So, with the emergence of private property, man is alienated from the following. Okay, now in this case, we first consider only the laborer. Okay, now a laborer is alienated, or he is separated from the product of his labor. Okay? The laborer contributes in the production process, and his labor, okay, the fact that he works, which is according to Marx a power. Okay, labor is a power, and we have the concept of labor power. The product of laborer's work, okay, is something he or she is not entitled to. Okay, so in the first place, the laborer is alienated or separated from the very product, okay, that has come up because or owing to his or her labor. Second, the very act of producing, right? Man is separate or separated or alienated from the very act of producing. Particularly when you consider assembly line production, for instance, factory production, for instance, what do we see? We see that, you know, it is in so many cases it is not a creative act. One is almost like a cog in a wheel, or a cog in a machine, okay, where you know, you're doing work that is repetitive, that is monotonous, boring, that does not really include a lot of creativity. Okay, so the very act of producing in a production process may be something that the laborer is something that the laborer is alienated from. Then third, the worker is alienated, okay, or separated from himself as a producer. Okay, in the whole production process, he is separated or alienated from the very fact that he or she is a producer. And finally, a laborer is alienated or separated from other producers, okay, from people who, you know, his peers, his people who work with him, right, in the production process are separated. So we saw quickly again that man is a creative worker who is separated from the product, who is alienated, so to speak, in four different ways. A, from the product of his labor. B, from the act of producing. C, from himself as a producer. And D, from the other producers in the production process. Now, that is why the fact that you know, the system is exploitative wherever there is this binary, okay, the system is exploitative, and the theory of communism is then summed up in one sentence, okay, abolish all private property. Now, this is something that you may, you know, imagine, very difficult for some of you maybe to imagine a way of life in which there is no private property. Okay, but Marx and Engels and other Marxists argue that it is possible to have a sort of life that is like a commune, right, where you do not own private property. More about this a while later. Now, again, coming back to alienation, okay, which is a result of private property. Alienation degrades not just the, you know, not just the workers. Now he says here, alienation degrades both the bourgeoisie, that is the capitalist class, and the proletariat, that is the laboring class. Okay, so it is something that happens to both classes. Whereas in the first go, you may feel that it is only the laborer who is alienated in four different ways. Okay, but it is not so. Now, I'm quoting here from Marx. The propertied class and the class of the proletariat present the same human self-estrangement. The self-estrangement obviously is a synonym for alienation. So, both the class that owns the property and the class of the proletariat or the laborer, okay, they both are alienated. But, you know, the former class, that is the propertied class, okay, or the class which owns the means of production. The former class feels at ease and strengthened in this self-estrangement. So even they are alienated, the situation is such for that class that they feel strengthened by this self-estrangement or alienation. It recognizes estrangement as its own power. For them, being alienated, you know, from the proletariat, being alienated in a couple of other ways, okay, as we saw, It is something that is to be celebrated. It is something that is for their own convenience. It is something that gives them power. Okay? This is how, even though both classes are alienated, there is a difference in how they perceive that alienation. Okay? So whereas now look at this slide here, please. The class of the proletariat, right? The other class, the class of the proletariat, it sees in its own powerlessness and the reality of an inhuman existence. The alienation, which is a source of power for the capitalist class and is considered as something desirable, in the case of the proletariat or the laborer, this class sees in such alienation its own powerlessness, okay, and what they perceive as an inhuman existence. Now, within this antithesis, the private property owner is therefore the conservative side. Now, we would call them the conservatives. Okay, why? Because simply look at the word conservative. They want to conserve, they want to preserve how things are. They want to preserve the relations of production. They want to preserve the mode of production that is going on, simply because the alienation that happens, okay, only strengthens them and is a source of power. From the former arises the action of preserving the antithesis. But in the case of the latter, that is in the case of the proletariat or the laborer, okay, from the latter we have the action of annihilating it. Okay? Therefore, they are the progressive side. Now, I'm sure you must have heard of these two terms, okay, which is which is the conservatives versus the progressives. Why are the proletariats known as the progressive and the capitalists known as the conservatives? Because, as I said earlier, in the first instance, they want to conserve the things as they are, the organization and the relations of production as they are. Okay, and on the other hand, the other class wants to progress, that is, they want to break these, and they wish to go ahead to a better system of organization. Okay, so I hope you've understood that the system of alienation, which many people say only the laborer is alienated, is not as it seems. Okay, both classes of the exploiter and the exploited in this within this cultural theory framework, okay, are actually estranged or alienated. Then this this whole concept, I've been using the word exploitation. How is how is this sought to be maintained, for instance? Now, Marxist theories would argue this, that all classes, okay, for that matter anyone who exploits somebody else or some other class in a system, gives a moral justification, okay, that this exploitation is being done towards, there is a certain moral rationale for this. Okay, so there is always a moral justification of class rule, in that they would say something like this, that ours, if you look at the slide here, ours or our system is the highest, is the most natural form of social development. Okay, so we have reached the stage which is the best. So every era or every mode of production, okay, would for instance in ancient slavery also they would have said that ours is the best form of social development. Do you follow? Capitalism would say that ours is the highest, and most importantly that it is the most natural form. For instance, let's go back to a time when there was absolute monarchy, right? So in absolute monarchy, what was the justification of the rule of the monarch, of the king? The justification would be something like this, that the king rules because the rule of the king is the most natural form. Now, the fact that it is natural, the fact that it is a given, what is the idea behind it? The idea behind it would be something like the divine right of kings, that kings have a divine right. Kings have a right given to them by God to rule. Okay, so these are ways in which the exploitation of one class over another is sought to be justified, that it is the morally best form ever that was there. Then I would like to quote this beautiful passage from Marx. Political economy, okay, regards the proletarian like a horse. He must receive enough to enable him to work. It does not consider him during the time when he is not working as a human being. It leaves this to criminal law, doctors, religion, statistical tables, politics, and the beadle. Okay, so the worker is like a horse, and you don't have to give him or her a lot, just enough for him or her. Okay, the moral justification would be this. Okay, so it's not like an animal. You will work, feed him or give him wages that are just enough for him to sustain himself and his or her family. Okay, so in Marx's works, when you read Das Kapital, for instance, one is so struck by the images that he uses, the metaphors. There's so many resonances from literary works, for instance, that many have said that Das Kapital is like poetry. Okay, it is not just a dry piece of work. There's so many allusions, and as you know, Marx was so widely read, right? So you in so many chapters you find passages that are so poetic. Then, just a while ago we were talking about social existence and how social existence determines our consciousness, and we looked at two concepts where one is the foundation of society, and the other is the social consciousness we have. We are going to work it out a bit more now, and we are going to give them particular names, and these terms are base and superstructure. There are two things here. Now let's go one by one. The first is the base. The base is what is the infrastructure or the economic base of society. The economic base of society comprises, broadly speaking, two things. Okay, you have an economic arrangement. Say, I work and I get paid for my work. Somebody pays me, right? So in that case, we have a certain certain kind of forces of production. Recall the term forces of production and the relations of production. Okay, and what else do you recall? That society changes when these two come in conflict. In a structure where there is a foundation or there is a base, okay, this base comprises two things: the forces of production and the relations of production. Okay, for instance, in a mode of production, in a way of production that is feudal, for instance, okay, land becomes the most important force of production, and as far as the relations of production are concerned, it is marked by basically the two binaries of the lord or the owner of the land and the tenant or the serf, okay, who works on that. Over the base, okay, now this is really an architectural metaphor being used here. Over the base, there arises something called the superstructure. Okay, now what is the superstructure? The superstructure that arises on the base or it comprises the political and ideological relationships. Now go back. In the first case, we have the economic relationships, okay, as shown by the forces of production and the corresponding relations of production. In the second case, we have the political, ideological relationships. Okay, that is, the argument is the way in which you find the base, the situation in which you find the base, or the whatever characterizes the base. Okay, that is going to determine, though I would again hasten to say, not in a fully deterministic way, in a mechanical deterministic way that this absolutely causes, because it is a little more complex than that. Okay, it will give rise to certain political institutions, certain ideological relationships, right? Look at the next slide. Here, down here we have the base, okay, which as I said comprises relations of production and the forces of production. Now this base and the situation or the circumstances or the nature of the base will give rise to a certain superstructure. Now what have we here in the superstructure? In the superstructure we have the, for instance, legal system, we have family, we have education, religion, and finally consciousness. Okay, so these, the legal system, family, education, religion, these are what? These are political ideological institutions, right? They give rise to certain relationships. Okay, now the legal system, family, education, and religion are not there in any given point of time in history just like that, just on their own, right? Why do we have certain legal system? Why does the legal system itself develop or change? Why are there amendments made? Why are there changes in educational policy, for instance? Why does the family change? Okay, you know, for instance, we have the joint family now, and before that we had different kinds of family. Today we have, you know, the nuclear family, right? So the family system in education, again, for instance, which was very different in olden times. Okay, these are so to speak, these are determined by the mode of production that is there in the base. So if it is a feudal system, then the laws would be, okay, laws would be owing to what is there in the base, owing to that particular mode of production. Okay, family, education, religion, all these would be determined by the mode of production in the base. And finally, our consciousness. Okay, our consciousness, which holds everything, what we think about, the values that we have, our awareness of things, our perceptions, okay, that is also part of the superstructure. And this very consciousness which we think is our very own, our own ego, again, for instance, okay, that is our own subjectivity. More on subjectivity later on in the next module. Our subjectivity included, these are actually determined by the economic arrangements in the base. Therefore, this very beautiful statement, okay, the ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. Now let's look at this again. In every age there will be some ideas, okay, some beliefs, some values, some way of thinking, okay, which are the ruling, or another word for it, which are the dominant ideas. These ideas are held to be, so to speak, true. These ideas are held to be adhered to or subscribed to by everybody. So these are ideas that are reigning or ruling, so to speak, in a particular age. Now, where do these ideas come from? Now, you'll recall that in idealism, okay, Hegel would say that these ideas are the reflection of ideas that are emanating from the absolute spirit, or ideas that are emanating from something that is not related to the material world. Okay, Marxism or dialectical materialism or historical materialism would say that our ideas come from how our material lives are arranged, and these so-called dominant ideas are actually the ideas of the class that is in power during that time. What does it mean to say that? It means to say that the ideas that you and I hold, if we are not critical beings, if we don't think critically, if we simply consume ideas, we need to be careful, because those ideas are serving the interest of somebody else. Okay, and whose interest? Serving the interest of the class that at the moment is in power, right? So this brings us to a term, really, because we're talking about ideas here, okay? This brings us to a term which I would again look at more deeply some other time, okay, in probably the next module. However, we can just have a quick preview of it here. This term is ideology. Now, how do we define ideology? Ideology is defined as a set of ideas, okay, or it is defined as lenses, or also as maps of meaning. So, ideology is a set of ideas, values, approach to the world, approach to reality that you and I hold. Okay, so you have a set of beliefs. For instance, we look at this slide. You have a set of beliefs about what the world is. Why is the world, or rather, I look at the world through these lenses. So I am, for instance, a materialist in the sense that I believe in Marxism. So I have a set of beliefs. Okay, I have a set of beliefs which makes me understand the world and everything in it as emanating from a certain economic base. Okay, or if I am a very religious person, then I own a different set of beliefs. My set of beliefs would be more like the idealists. I would argue that I look at the world and look at all my activities from the point of view of religion. I look at if something happens to me, I look at it as a punishment for something I did maybe in my last life, or something that I haven't followed the rules of religion, of the scriptures, and here is a God that has punished me. So these are also maps, and if you look at the slide here, the third meaning is, these are ideology refers to maps of meaning, how we make meaning out of our lives, okay, and how we make meaning out of our lives is conditioned by a set of beliefs. Now, this set of beliefs are again in turn conditioned by what? Conditioned by the base. Okay, so quickly let's again look back at that the architecture of the base and the superstructure. So my ideology would be a result of the relations of production and the forces of production, that is the mode of production that is going on, okay, which determines all these things from which arise my set of beliefs about the world. So, well, Barker here says that ideology is so much a part of so much part and parcel of Marxism that he says, or cultural studies, he says that so influential has the concept of ideology been within cultural studies that the whole field was once dubbed ideological studies. Okay, so cultural studies was once even called by somebody or some people ideological studies, a study of ideology. Okay. We come now to, because we're talking about ideology, we come to a very important figure here, and you must, some of you are aware of this person, the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. Okay, his prison notebooks are among his most famous of his works. Okay, now with Gramsci, we come to the idea of ideology as being fleshed out, right? So I'm reading from Chris Barker. As you know, Chris Barker's Cultural Studies Theory and Practice is one seminal text in this course. Okay, as far as the entire course is concerned. Every now and then, when I talk about in certain modules, I may take up a particular text. For instance, in evolutionary psychology or memetics, we took recourse to particular texts, but as a whole, if I were to pick a book that one can use in a cultural studies course or at this level, Barker's book would be a good choice. So for Gramsci, and I'm reading from Barker, from Gramsci, ideology is grasped as ideas, meanings and practices which, while they purport to be universal truths, are maps of meaning that support the power of particular social classes. Okay, I should hasten to add here, there are of course other books by Barker, and when you look at concepts, you could do well to look at the Sage Handbook of Cultural Studies, from which I think this I've taken this particular quotation from. Well, let's look at it again. For Gramsci, ideology is what? It's grasped as ideas, meanings and practices which, while they purport to be universal truths, are maps of meaning that support the power of particular social classes. So, even though the word ideology comes from the word idea or ideas, for Gramsci, ideology is not just idea or the thought in your head, okay, it's also the practices, okay. So, next, here ideology is not separate. Now, this is the point. Here ideology is not separate from the practical activities. That is, ideology is not just your thought. It is the practical activities are also part of it. Here ideology is not separate from the practical activities of life, but provides people with rules of practical conduct and moral behavior. You have a certain idea in your head, and that is going to guide your practical behavior. That is going to guide your practical conduct, your moral behavior. Why? You behave in a certain supposedly moral way because you hold that you have a framework in which some things are morally good and some things are morally unsound. So, let's look at this again. Ideology is understood to be both lived experience and a body of systematic ideas. Okay, then that's the beauty of this extension here, as I said, this fleshing out. Ideology is both lived experience and it is a body of systematic ideas whose role is to organize and bind together a block of diverse social elements. So, along with ideology, we come to another word here, which is the concept of hegemony. Okay, hegemony is usually understood when you read your history in your school. For instance, you may have come across words like hegemonic rule. For instance, there is this ruler here, okay, and then it is a hegemonic rule. He has hegemony over a certain territory. Now, we extend that to hegemony over the mind. Okay, rule over the mind. And unlike as it is understood in hegemonic territorial rule, in this case we say that hegemony or a rule over our minds, so to speak, rule over our ideas, is not always something that has been forced into you. It is not something that is coercive. Okay, so look at the slide here, please. We have this concept of the first one, manufactured consent. Your consent, your the fact that you agree to be in the system, okay, the fact that you agree to the with the ideas, the fact that you agree as to what is moral, immoral, etc., is your consent. The fact your agreement, so to speak, is one that has been manufactured. Okay, you may not be aware of it. Okay, but in ideology and hegemony studies, we say that our consent, so to speak, to a certain convention is one that has been manufactured. Manufactured then by what? Now look at the second point here. Manufactured by the processes of socialization. Okay, now what are the processes of socialization? First is the family. Okay, your family trains you to be a part of society. We are trained to be social beings. Okay, then next you go to school. The education system is another institution, like the family is an institution which carries out further this process of socialization. And finally, you have the cultural institutions like religion, for instance. Again, they have certain, religion will tell you how to behave, okay, what to hold as being moral or immoral, right? Education, as I mentioned, and the mass media. The mass media, the media are a very, very powerful source of manufacturing this. If you consume, say, soap operas, or you have this television serials, or the news, for instance, if you simply consume it without, critically questioning the representation in the media, for instance, then you are being socialized, right? You're being socialized, and your consent is manufactured. Yes, I accept it as it is. Okay, advertising. If you look at advertisements, advertising is also one way of manufacturing your consent. How? It is often said that the desire for an object is created in you even before you begin to desire that object, right? If you don't see something being advertised the way it is shown as something that you have to possess, and just look at the the lines that they use, the slogans that are used. Okay, we are being processed, we are being socialized through these processes. Okay, so our consent is not one that is always forced. Okay, our consent is very cleverly manufactured. Next, again with hegemony, this is leadership. With leadership we mean the ones, we're talking about the ones who are in power, for instance, the class that is in power, and in Marxist terminology. Hegemony is seen as leadership with the consent of the led. Say, we are led by leaders, but with our consent. Remember, our consent is manufactured. Now, I will talk very quickly about another theorist whose name is Louis Althusser. And Althusser divided this, this consent, so to speak, okay, this hegemony, into two ways of doing it. And I said one is the repressive state apparatuses, known popularly in Marxist studies as the RSAs. The repressive state apparatuses are the coercive measures. For instance, the police, okay, the army, the legal system. These are coercive in the sense that if you do not follow them, right, they are, apparatuses, so to speak, of the state, of the government, okay, which force you. Now you are, you will be booked if, so you are coerced into following those, and Althusser calls them repressive. And the second way is ideological state apparatuses. These ideological state apparatuses, or the ISAs, are really not coercive, okay, but they are apparatuses nonetheless. Okay, they are referred to not as the hard policing that you saw in the first case. Okay, look at the first case, which is a repressive state apparatus, coercive. The other kind is the ideological, want to do with ideas, which we call soft policing. The ideological state apparatuses is getting your consent not by coercive measures, but getting your getting your consent through a soft policing or through ideological practices. For instance, we looked at mass media, we looked at education. These are not coercive. You are not put to jail if you are not going for education, or if you're not put to jail if you don't watch the television, or if you speak out against the representation of women, for instance, in television. Okay, but they are apparatuses in the sense that if you are not aware, if you are not conscious about it, okay, these are also ingrained, right? They're ingrained into you through these kind of soft policing. So Louis Althusser is the theorist that I happen to mention here. Okay, very quickly, of course. Well, now let's look at this slide. The cultural forms or products, okay, in various media, various kinds of media. The cultural forms or products are what? They are ways or modes of representation. Now, representation is another word where I'll devote maybe a lecture or two in the next module when we go to the key concepts. Okay, for now, it suffices to say that the various products that we see in the media. Now, here media means not just the television or the radio or newspapers. It also could mean literature is really media, or a performance. Performance in art or painting. These are media in the sense that they're medium, source of media, right? They are ways or modes of representation, and these representations, okay, it is held in Marxist cultural theory, these representations are there to serve the dominant classes. So these involve institutionalized processes of production, distribution, and consumption of these cultural products. These cultural products, which are given to us through various media, they are the production and distribution and consumption. It is not that they just happen. Okay, the production, distribution, and consumption of these cultural products are sort of channelized, so to speak, by the dominant classes. Censorship, for instance, is a case in point here. Okay, So whether you are allowed to consume a certain kind of art product, okay, and how it is distributed and what are the rules in its production in the first place, right? So look at the slide once again. Production, distribution and consumption of any cultural artifact or product, okay, these come to us via certain institutionalized processes. These institutionalized processes are part of the, are they part of the base or the superstructure? They are a part of the superstructure. Therefore, in cultural studies, the whole in Marxist cultural studies, the whole concept of meaning formation is seen here articulated as a tussle for meaning, okay, by where dominant groups give us ideologies or worldviews in a bid to maintain the status quo and for standardization, okay, so that everybody believes and believes in it and consumes the ideological and cultural products. Therefore, class and culture are intertwined. Bourgeois cultural forms, and we have proletarian culture. It's not that proletarians do not have their cultural forms, but this question of taste, you know, what is in good taste and what is in bad taste, what is high culture, what is low culture, okay, it is determined by class concerns. Now, the state of communism, for instance, is seen as by Marx as a state in which, from there will be a situation in which each person would contribute to society according to his or her own ability, and to each would be given what he or she needs. I would like to quickly end with a quotation before I go on to one or two questions, which to me is something that is so beautifully put, again as we find in other cases in Marx. The way of life in communism as envisaged by Karl Marx is this: in communist society, where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman or critic. Now quickly let's go to the discussion. What is base and superstructure? What are base and superstructure? Base is the infrastructure of the economic base of a society, whereas superstructure is what arises over it, the political and ideological relationships. What is man alienated from in circumstances where private property is present? In the following way: from his labor, from the act of producing, from himself as a producer, and from other producers. What is ideology? Ideology may be defined as a set of beliefs or lenses or maps of meaning. What is hegemony? Hegemony is leadership with the consent of the led, and there are two types, as mentioned by Louis Althusser. These are the repressive state apparatus that are coercive, and the ideological state apparatus that are not coercive but they are soft policing, and they are policing nonetheless. Explain false consciousness. What is it to have false consciousness? False consciousness are institutional processes which lead to the misrecognition of our true nature and our social realities. For instance, the bourgeois has a false consciousness, and as well as the proletarian, if they do not realize that they are a class that are for itself. What, according to Marx, should philosophy do? According to Marx, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Finally, name two goals of communism. The two goals of communism may be mentioned like this: to transform both the world and man's consciousness of the world, and to achieve a state of communism. And what was it, as we saw a while ago? In which a state in which each will give or contribute to society according to his or her own ability, and each will get from society what each of us needs. Okay, so we have come to the end of this lecture, and it is obvious that two lectures are simply not enough to bring Marxist cultural theory to you. However, my hope is that this is just the beginning and would lead you to the important works by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and the other Marxist critics who followed, and you will look at this as a theory that is so that is not just a theory to analyze our cultural lives. Okay, it is a theory, as Marx said, and we saw. It is a theory which also it urges us to go in for change, urges us to interpret the world, and at the same time to take up to act in a way in which we can make a system that is not exploitative. We can construct a system that is fair to one and all. Thank you.